Master Sergeant Luna Castellanos received the call at 200. Your husband never made it back from the night patrol. 4 hours later, standing waist-deep in the floodwaters that had swept through their base camp, she would find his wedding. Ring caught on a piece of debris, while the search teams looked for his body in all the wrong places. Master Sergeant Luna Castellanos stood at the edge of the makeshift command post as dawn broke over forward operating base Raven in eastern Afghanistan. The October monsoon had turned their usually dry valley into a maze of rushing water and unstable terrain, complicating everything from supply deliveries to patrol routes. At 29, Luna commanded the base's Combat Search and Rescue Unit, a position she'd earned through 8 years of military service that began with Army medic training and evolved into specialized rescue operations. Her team of 12 soldiers handled everything from downed aircraft recovery to extracting wounded personnel from hostile territory. The flooding had created the kind of dangerous conditions that made search and rescue operations exponentially more complex. Swift currents, hidden obstacles, and constantly changing water levels turned familiar terrain into deadly traps that could claim lives in minutes rather than hours. Her husband, Staff Sergeant Miguel Castellanos, served as a squad leader in the base's infantry unit. They'd been married for 3 years, having met during advanced combat training at Fort Benning, and had managed to secure assignments that kept them at the same base for most of their careers. The irony of their situation wasn't lost on Luna. She spent her days rescuing people from impossible situations, but when the person she needed to find was her own husband, all her training felt inadequate. Subscribe to hear more stories of veterans who faced their greatest challenges, not in combat, but in the quiet moments when everything they valued was at risk. Luna's expertise in search and rescue had been shaped by growing up in the mountains of New Mexico, where her grandfather, a former Navy rescue swimmer, had taught her that water could be both life-giving and deadly within the span of minutes. He'd shown her how to read currents, understand weather patterns, and most importantly, how to think like someone who was lost or trapped. Her grandfather, Carlos Montoya, had spent 30 years pulling people from sinking ships and crashed aircraft, and he'd passed down techniques that weren't taught in any military manual. By age 16, Luna could navigate by stars, predict flash flood timing from cloud formations, and perform water rescues in conditions that would challenge experienced professionals. When she enlisted, her natural abilities caught the attention of instructors who recommended her for specialized training. She'd completed advanced rescue swimmer school, tactical combat casualty care, and helicopter operations training, becoming one of the few soldiers qualified to perform rescues in all environments. Her marriage to Miguel had been built on shared understanding of military life and mutual respect for each other's capabilities. He was an exceptional infantry soldier who understood terrain and tactics, while she brought specialized rescue skills that complemented his combat experience. They'd worked together on several operations where his knowledge of patrol routes had helped her locate downed personnel. But the current situation was different. This wasn't about rescuing strangers or recovering equipment. This was about finding the person whose safety mattered more to her than her own, and every minute that passed felt like a failure of the skills she'd spent years perfecting. The official search operation was being coordinated by Major Harrison, the base operations officer, who'd arrived from division headquarters 2 months earlier. Despite Luna's specialized training and intimate knowledge of the local terrain, he'd assigned her to coordinate logistics rather than lead the actual search teams. Major Harrison's reasoning was that personal involvement would compromise her. Judgment and that emotional attachment made her unsuitable for objective decision-making. He'd expressed concerns that her relationship with Miguel would cause her to take unnecessary risks or make tactical errors that could endanger other personnel. The conflict deepened when Luna presented analysis showing that the official search pattern was based on outdated terrain maps that didn't account for how the flooding had changed water flow patterns. Her recommendations for alternative search areas were dismissed as emotional speculation rather than professional assessment. Other officers supported Harrison's position, arguing that military regulations existed specifically to prevent personal relationships from interfering with operational effectiveness. They pointed out that Luna's rescue training was designed for hostile combat situations, not natural disaster response, and that civilian search techniques might be more appropriate. The most painful aspect was watching search teams waste hours, examining areas where Miguel couldn't possibly have ended up, while the water continued to rise and wash away evidence that could lead to his location. Her professional expertise told her exactly where to look, but military protocol prevented her from acting on that knowledge. The base chaplain had suggested that she focus on supporting other family members rather than trying to direct search operations, implying that her role should be emotional rather than tactical during this crisis. Luna spent the morning hours fighting the urge to abandon protocol and begin her own search operation. Every instinct developed through years of rescue training screamed that the official search was looking in wrong places, but military discipline held her in place at the command post. She thought about the last conversation she'd had with Miguel before his patrol departed. They discussed plans for leave time next month, talked about visiting her family in New Mexico, and shared the quiet intimacy of a couple who'd learned to treasure ordinary moments between deployments. The wedding ring they both wore had belonged to her grandfather, passed down from his Navy service. Miguel had insisted on wearing it, despite regulations that discouraged jewelry during combat operations, saying it reminded him that someone was waiting for his safe return. Standing at the command post, watching search teams move through areas she knew were wrong, felt like watching people try to solve a puzzle while ignoring the pieces that didn't fit. Her training and experience provided clear answers, but her personal stake in the outcome invalidated her professional judgment in the eyes of her superiors. The hardest part was maintaining composure while time ran out. Every hour that passed meant Miguel was either found safe or lost forever, and she possessed knowledge that could make the difference between those outcomes. She closed her eyes and remembered her grandfather's most important lesson. Sometimes the only way to save someone is to trust what you know, even when everyone else thinks you're wrong. By midday, the official search had covered 3 square kilometers without finding any trace of Miguel or his patrol equipment. Radio communications had been lost with his unit 6 hours after they'd departed for what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission along the valley's eastern ridge. Luna's analysis of weather data and terrain changes suggested that Miguel's patrol had been caught in a flash flood that had redirected them toward a narrow canyon system that didn't appear on the maps being used by search teams. The water flow patterns she'd observed indicated that anyone swept off the main trail would be carried toward a series of natural pools formed by recent erosion. When she presented this analysis to Major Harrison, he questioned whether her conclusions were based on objective assessment or wishful thinking. He pointed out that her suggested search area was nearly 2 kilometers from Miguel's planned route, and that deploying resources there would mean abandoning the systematic grid search already in progress. The tension escalated when Luna requested permission to take a small team to investigate the canyon system on her own authority. Major Harrison refused, stating that splitting search resources would reduce overall effectiveness, and that her emotional investment made her unsuitable for independent operations. Other search teams began reporting equipment failures and personnel, injuries caused by the dangerous conditions, forcing Harrison to consider whether to suspend operations until the weather improved. The possibility of calling off the search while Miguel was still missing pushed Luna toward a decision that would define both her military career and her marriage. As afternoon approached and water levels continued to rise, Luna faced the choice between following orders that felt wrong or risking court-martial to act on professional knowledge that everyone else was ignoring. Luna made her decision during the afternoon briefing when Major Harrison announced that search operations would be suspended until morning due to deteriorating conditions and equipment limitations. She requested permission to speak privately with him, then formally presented her resignation from the active search coordination role. Her request was simple: allow her to conduct a limited reconnaissance of the canyon system with one volunteer teammate, using her own equipment and accepting full responsibility for the mission outcome. If she found no evidence within 2 hours, she would return and support whatever decision Harrison made about continuing official search operations. When Harrison refused and ordered her to remain at the command post, Luna made the choice that would end her military career but potentially save her husband's life. She gathered her rescue equipment, informed Sergeant Rodriguez that she was conducting an unauthorized reconnaissance mission, and left the base perimeter toward the canyon system her analysis had identified. The terrain was more treacherous than expected. Water levels had transformed familiar hiking trails into rushing streams, and the canyon walls showed fresh erosion that indicated multiple flash floods had passed through within the past 12 hours. Luna moved carefully, reading water patterns and debris placement to track the most likely path anyone swept off the main trail would have followed. 2 hours into her unauthorized mission, she found Miguel's equipment bag caught on a fallen tree branch near a series of natural pools formed by the flooding. The bag contained his radio, first aid kit, and personal items, but no sign of Miguel himself. Then she saw the wedding ring, caught on a piece of debris in shallow water about 50 meters downstream from the equipment. The ring that had belonged to her grandfather, worn by Miguel despite regulations, now served as a marker leading her toward the place where the current had carried him. Luna found Miguel unconscious but alive, trapped in a natural depression behind a fallen log that had created a pocket of calm water. He'd suffered a concussion and hypothermia from hours in the cold mountain water, but her immediate medical treatment stabilized his condition enough for evacuation. The rescue required techniques she'd learned from her grandfather, using natural anchors and water flow patterns to safely extract someone from a position that conventional rescue equipment couldn't reach. By the time the official search teams arrived at her coordinates, she'd already established a secure evacuation route and begun warming treatment for Miguel's hypothermia. Major Harrison's response was immediate and predictable. Luna faced disciplinary action for disobeying direct orders and conducting unauthorized operations that had endangered personnel and violated established protocols. Her actions would result in formal reprimand and likely affect her career advancement opportunities, but the investigation into Miguel's patrol revealed that official search operations had been based on incorrect assumptions about terrain and water flow patterns. Luna's analysis had been accurate, and her unauthorized mission had located Miguel in the only area where he could have survived the flash flood that had swept his patrol off their planned route. Within weeks, the base's search and rescue protocols had been updated to incorporate Luna's terrain analysis techniques and alternative search pattern methodologies. Her grandfather's water rescue techniques became part of standard training for personnel operating in mountainous terrain. The most significant change was in how the base handled situations where personal relationships intersected with professional expertise. New guidelines allowed for family members with relevant specialized training to contribute to search operations under controlled circumstances, recognizing that emotional investment could enhance rather than compromise professional judgment. Miguel's recovery took several weeks, but he returned to full duty with stories about how Luna's voice had guided him to the depression where she'd found him, even though he'd been unconscious when she arrived. The wedding ring that had marked his location was returned to its place on his finger, now carrying additional meaning as the beacon that had led his wife to save his life. Luna's career survived the disciplinary action, but more importantly, she'd proven that sometimes the most important search and rescue operation is the one you conduct when everyone else has given up hope.